So hello and welcome back to episode 16 of the Time to Calibrate podcast. I am Brett Robia from the Calibrated Wrist, and I'm joined this morning by my co-host Bob Halliby of Time to Go, Travel and Timepieces, and freelance writer Mark Levesque. However, we do have a special guest with us this morning in one RJ Brewer. How are you this morning, RJ?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Now, just for our listeners' sake, if they've been living underneath a rock, I'll let them know a little bit about you. RJ has been tacitly collecting watches since he was a child, though I'm sure he hates the word collecting. This early addiction naturally led him to the Omega brands and to the Speedmaster in particular. By 2004, he was already writing about watches as a hobbyist, but after his first pilgrimage to Baselworld in 2008, there was no turning back. RJ is perhaps best known as the founder of Fratello, one of the most popular watch sites on the planet. RJ, we're very lucky to have you with us here this morning, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for us. We like to begin, as watch podcasts are wont to do, with a wrist check. So as our guest, you have first dibs. What do you got on wrist this morning?
I'm wearing my Speedmaster Caliber 321 from 2020, so the new one in steel. And it has quickly become one of my favorite modern Speedmasters, basically.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. How about you, Mark?
I've got my Tudor Black Bay Pro on. It has become my absolute favorite watch. I still love my GS, my Grand Seiko SPG 257. That one has more sentimental value, but my Tudor just takes up all my wrist time. I just love it.
I do think that's an attractive piece. What about you, Bob?
So we were talking before, we've been getting hit with some heavy amounts of snow here in Canada, in our part of Canada, the last few days. Lots of snow shoveling, so something a little bit robust on wrist, the Marathon Navigator, the quartz version of the watch for me.
That's exactly what I was wearing last night when I got home and had to shovel it myself. This morning, I was intending to put on my Speedmaster 125 in order to honor our guests here this morning, but I was running around, as I mentioned earlier, and I didn't even get time to change watches. So actually, I have on the Seamaster 25 30 bucks. RJ, I'm going to stick you in the hot seat right away here. You were a child of the 70s, but you grew up really in the 80s. What was your introduction to watches, and what were you wearing in those early days?
Well, I was born in 77, so from the 70s, I don't remember that much. I think my earliest remembrance of watches is wearing this digital watch with a blue. It was not a Casio or something, but it looked like one, blue and white. And I think I still have a picture of me an early age wearing it. But the first watch I really remember, and I still have it actually, is a Casio W-14, which I got, I think, in 1985 when I was with my parents on a holiday in the UK. And as you do, you visit London, you visit Canterbury, and there was a Dixon's, I remember. And I really wanted to have the G-Shock. So it should be one of the first square G-Shocks that I saw there. But you wouldn't believe it. But I was a very, very slim, petite guy when I was young. So the watch looked lift. So I went for the W14, which is similar to the famous, what is it, F91?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But in a different color scheme.
Fantastic. I actually, I had a lot of watches when I was young as well, including some Timexes that I recall. But the first watch I ever remember desiring and asking my parents for was actually a Casio, and it was the calculator watch. I guess it might have been called the Data Bank or something like that. All my brothers thought I was a nerd when I finally received it, but I really enjoyed that one. So I heard a story about how you obtained your first Speedmaster. Could you tell us which model it was and how you generated the funds to obtain that watch?
In the 80s, it was mainly Casio and later on Swatch as well. And then early 90s as well. And at some point, so Omega was a brand that ran in the family. Even my great-grandfather bought his first Constellation in 66 or 67. My grandfather bought his in 1969. February 6th, I still have the invoice and the signed papers.
Oh, no, that's cool.
And So it ran through the family, and my dad always said, yeah, Omega was the first brand that had a watch on the moon. But I didn't know what that meant because I'm from 77. So I know the space shuttle, but not what happened before. So he told me that when I was 10 or 11 or 12 years old, something like that, like in the 80s. And, but I remember that he said Omega was the first watch, basically one on the moon. And later on, of course, I found out it was the Speedmaster. And that was not entirely the reason I got into Speedmasters, but I really liked the design. So that for me was the most important thing. For me, it's the most readable chronograph out there. And I for me, it still is actually. I love the timeless design. So at some point I set my mind on getting a Speedmaster. And then I saw one in 99. I was a student here in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And one evening I was on my bicycle, as we do here, giggling through the streets. And I passed by a watch shop. And that watch shop had a bunch of watches in the display, in the window. Different times, because these days all the watches are removed because of burglary and whatnot. But at that time, they still had them in the evening in the window, and there were two Speedmasters. One was a vintage one, a 145012 caliber 321. The other one was probably 3590. So it was a regular Speedmaster Professional with caliber 861, and just a few years old back then. The funny thing is that I wanted to have the newer one because it was a newer one, but the 321 was cheaper.
Oh boy,
those were the days.
Students, I thought, okay, I will settle for the cheaper one, for the 321. So I did my due diligence on Time Zone back in the day, and Watchuseek and all the forums, and then I knew I had to get it. And it was not like today that watch was there probably for weeks or months, so it didn't leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I called over and I said, I want to have a look at that watch. And I had a look at the watch, and then I made up my mind, yes, I want it, but I need to get the funds done. And I said I was still a student, but I still had a car, because originally I'm from the east part of the Netherlands, near the German border. So unfortunately, I can also understand and speak German. In that area of the country, you really need a car, because the public transport is really awful. So when I moved to the west part of the Netherlands, near the seaside, public transport it's much better. So I didn't need the car. So I sold the car basically to fund the watch. And I also have to admit, and my parents don't know this, because I was an IT student in IT and information management. I also stole my laptop at the time. So all the assignments for the university I had to do at university and not at home anymore. I sold my car and my laptop, and then I had enough funds for so I bought it on Friday, October 1st, 99. And it was the caliber 321, and I still have it. And
oh wow, good for you.
I was then watched it. And I have to say, times were really different back then, because at the time, nobody cared about a dot over 90 or I don't know what. So yeah, I wore it every day, and I wore it to bars and clubs and I don't know what. So I really added some scratches and dents on there, and had it restored, and perhaps not in the best way as I would have done it today. But if the bezel was dented, I just put on a new bezel. It was 50 euros at the time. And that was what it was. So later on, I had to correct all those mistakes. But I still have that watch, and it's in decent condition, and cherish it. So that was my first Speedmaster, basically.
What was the price tag on that watch back at that point in time, I wonder?
I think he asked like a bit over 2,000 Dutch guilders. So that was in the time before the euro was introduced. So that I think would be the same as 1,000 euros or something, which it's not much money, but at the time as a student, I lived off 25 euros per week at some point. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now, RJ, I remember first encountering you on timezone.com, where you and our mutual friend, Chuck Maddox, were our resident experts, Omega experts. My first Omega Seamaster review was actually hosted on Chronocentric, which is Chuck's old website, and the pictures were taken by Michael Sandler. Sadly, we lost Chuck in May of 2008 at the age of 46, pardon me. Can you tell us about your time on timezone.com and about your relationship with Chuck?
Yes. Well, so I lived in a house with we call it a student's house in the Netherlands, but it's a house with separate rooms where you have students. It's not I don't know the English word for it, but
Like a dorm?
Yeah, I guess so. So we had 7 students in the house, and some other students, they knew I was very occupied with watches. Well, everyone knew actually, and one of them was also my fellow student in the same study in The Hague. And he always said I was a bit sick in the head because I always knew the exact URL of the Omega forum and time zone. I just typed it in. So, yeah, I was a lot on that forum. I think it was the pre-social media days. But in all due respect, I think those days it was more social than social media is today.
Agreed.
And I think a lot of friendships were born there that still remain. And even also with Chuck Maddox until he passed away in 2008. I think that was a bit before Facebook and Instagram and so on.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, I could be found there quite often, like you. I recognize your name, of course, and I really try to interact with other fans of the brand, and it also led me to opening this website called omega-addict.com to put on some articles. I think I still pay $100 a year to keep it alive, but I haven't looked at it since 25 years or so. So yeah, it was an interesting time, and I was in touch with Chuck Maddox a lot. We emailed back and forth, sometimes almost on a daily basis, and later on we also called. I think you had this method to call through internet. I can't exactly remember, but it was at low cost or no cost, and so we spoke quite a bit. I was not that as close with him as Bill Sohn is or was, for example. He was much closer to Chuck Maddox, but we definitely exchanged a lot of emails and conversations about Speedmasters and Seamasters and so on. Definitely. He was a legendary guy. And I remember vividly when I heard that he passed away, and I was quite in shock, to be honest. He didn't appear to me as the most healthy guy walking around, but yeah, he was way too young. And yeah, really sad. Also, the sad thing is that his website is kept alive, which is good. But you also see now, many more years later, that a lot of stuff has been corrected. It has been, how do you say, the truth has come at the surface about certain things where we assumed certain things 20 years ago or 15 years ago. That seems to be a little bit different today based on things that come from the archive or from the brands and so on. Because the brands today are much more open than they were before 2008, basically. It was very difficult to get in touch with brands, to get information from them. If you got information, it was often from very old guys working there already for 50 years. And a lot of it was done by what they remembered, but not so much by like hard evidence. And I think, time showed that some things were really different than we assumed back then, that it was a coincidence that the Speedmaster was bought or purchased by NASA for use in space. And of course, it's a bit unthinkable because there's a proper process and procedure for that. For equipment, acquiring equipment, you need to have a proper request for proposal, basically, rather than a guy going into a local jewelry store buying 3 watches, which was the assumption back then. So all stuff has been, proven to be different. And I think Chuck Maddox would have loved to see all these things.
Oh, he would have adored it.
Facts, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually, it's fun going to his website because it still looks the way it did back then. And if you do go on to the Internet Archive, there's a Wayback Machine and you can put in the URL and you go back to the original pages and see that on there. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
We had William Messina on the last episode, an old friend of ours as well. And we talked about Terry Russell. You remember T-Bone used to have these wrap-ups every week where he would make fun of certain people. Or not make fun, but poke fun at the things that happened during the week. Yeah. I did a deep dive on the Internet Archive. I couldn't find anything on you, so unfortunately there's no blurb there saying anything funny. I tried.
No, I also remember that I left Time Zone and I hopped over to Watchuseek. Also because there was I think traffic speed was shifting a bit. But also what I noticed back then is that there was a repetition going on. If there will be new people on time zone, you would see the same questions appearing over and over again. So it's like a lot of.
I remember that too. And then that kind of leads to my next subject here. You spent time on Time Zone when it was purchased by Ashford. A lot of us went all over the place. We covered this last week or last time with William Messina. And then you went over to Watchuseek. Now, I worked with Ernie way back between when Watchuseek became an actual forum. When it was a links page, he worked with me on watchzone.net, where we grew that website until we got bought by another entity. But anyways, long story short, you went over to Watchuseek. You were moderator there. How was your time there? How did you like it? And Mike Stuffler says hello.
That's nice. He used to work and live in the same city where I'm still residing. Watchuseek was very friendly, I have to say. I think Time Zone was a bit more aimed at the US, and I think there were also a lot of people from Singapore there, if I'm not mistaken.
There were originally, yes.
Yeah, so and Watchuseek, you saw a lot more Europeans at the time, and since I am living there, that I think that resonated a little bit better with me. And also the owner and founder of Watchuseek, Ernie Romers, he's a friend, and I knew him beforehand, and I still am in touch with him once in a while. He still follows what we do, more or less. He still loves watches, but he plays golf these days, so he's my idol. But those were nice days, and I have to say I did the moderation of the Omega forums there, I think around 2001, 2002. And then at some point I also stopped doing that and started Fratello in 2004. So there was a little bit of time off between Watchuseek and Fratello, basically.
You are credited with having coined the term and then the eventual hashtag Speedy Tuesday, which has now been used more than 400,000 times on Instagram alone. How did that happen? And then how does it feel to be someone who started this sort of cultural phenomenon?
Yeah, it's a bit strange because I think there was no thought behind it. Also here, there was no thought behind it. I was on a holiday in the south of France. We were with friends, and I think it was in Cannes. And I just took a picture of my Speedmaster that I brought with me on the holidays, and I posted it in a group on Facebook that was only about wrist shots. And I think I looked for it later on again, but I think it was deleted or I don't know what. But I posted a picture on Facebook and I said it's Speedy Tuesday because it was a Speedmaster and it was a Tuesday. And then as soon as I posted it, I thought, oh, that's a nice working title. It sounds as a nice working title. So I started doing Speedmaster coverage on Fratello every Tuesday, or on Tuesdays. At first, it was once every month or once every 3 weeks, but it took off that rapidly that I thought, okay, I'm going to do this every week. Because there's a lot to tell. A lot of people are reaching out with their own stories and pictures and I don't know what. And I think later the year, I also started to use the hashtag on Instagram. And then it really took off. So there was the accelerator basically on Instagram. And even now on Tuesdays, when people post a Speedmaster, they use the hashtag Speedy Tuesday. And perhaps you noticed, some people only noticed recently, but since 7 or 8 years, with the exception of the first Omega in Space release, all the Speedmasters by Omega are introduced on a Tuesday.
So I didn't realize that, actually.
They are really committed as well to it. So I started doing this since 2012. And then in 2013 or 14, we had our first Speedy Tuesday event locally here at the European Space Agency. They have a visitor center here near Amsterdam. So we organized an event there with like 80 something people for a lunch and a tour in the visitor center of the European Space Agency. And Omega was there with a collection from the museum. And that was really cool. And I think a few years later, we started to do them in Switzerland as well. And then they gave the proper support in doing it, having guests over and making it for free for those who attended. So that was a really cool thing. And then at some point when the current CEO became the CEO in 2016, we sat down, we had a lunch, and he said, yeah, Speedy Tuesday is super nice, and I love it, and I want to support it. And now that I'm CEO, perhaps we can do a little bit more. Do you have any idea on what we can do? I said, well, next year, so 2017 at the time, it's 5 years of Speedy Tuesday, so perhaps we can do something nice. And I'm not talking about a pen or a button or a cap, but a proper watch. And then he said, okay, that doesn't sound bad. Just shoot me some designs or ideas that you have. And I already had ideas and designs, but I waited a few more days just to make it look more natural. And then after a few days, I showed him some of the designs we did here at Fratello for the Speedy Tuesday watch. And he said, yes, let's make something. So a few months later, they came with a mood board with some ideas about the first Speedy Tuesday watch. And our idea was to do a reverse panda design with a radial dial. And they came up with, let's do an all brushed case. So it was really going back and forth on design ideas and design cues for that watch. And then I think at some point the design was done. And then the CEO reached out to me and he said, so how many pieces should we do? And I said, well, 300, something like that, because those were also the numbers that they used to do for the Italian market, for the German market. And I thought, yeah, a lot of people like Speedy Tuesday, but it's something different. Liking and buying a €5,500 watch, right? It's not the same. So I was a bit anxious and nervous. And he said, no, 300 is too low. And so I tried 500, but that also didn't hold. And then he said, no, we need at least 2,000. So I said, then let's do 2012, because that's the founding year. And they said, okay, let's do 2012. And then it went live in January 2017. And I remember I had sleepless nights before, because I thought, what if they only sell 100? It would be awful. That would be awful for me and for Fratello, but also for Omega to that doesn't sell. And I was really nervous. And I think he was as well, because it was the first online project for them. It was the first time they sold a watch online. So all the eyes from Swatch Group management were looking at this project. But it went live and it sold out in a flash, basically. And the wait list was thousands and thousands of people. So it was a huge success, but not entirely expected to be. Just Speedy Tuesday was not something we expected to be so big. And also the first limited edition watch was also something I didn't expect to happen. And when it was happening, I didn't expect to be that successful. So it's all very organic, basically.
Very cool. So I have a little bit of a question that's a slight change of gears. And I was looking around to see if you'd talked about this online somewhere in the past. I'm sure you have, but just being the creator of Speedy Tuesday, your connection to the Speedmaster, I'm curious how you felt about the MoonSwatch release at the time, and maybe if that opinion has changed since then.
Yeah, of course. I have to admit, I saw the MoonSwatch a week before it was launched. So together with a group of people, like 6 of us, I think, we were invited to come to Switzerland, to Biel, where the Swatch headquarters is, to meet with Mr. Hayek, Nick Hayek. And I didn't know what it was. And then Reinhard Aschleman, the CEO of Omega, told me, yeah, you're invited because, it was Speedy Tuesday. So let's have a look what it is. So then the next day, I was in Biel at the Swatch building, and there was Mr. Hayek, and he had all these 11 watches there. And I looked at them, and I thought, it says Speedmaster. But then I immediately realized, if it would not say Speedmaster on the dial, people would say it's a Speedmaster copy. And now, because it says Speedmaster on the dial, it is a Speedmaster. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's a clever thing that he did. And then Mr. Hayek, he stood next to me suddenly, and I think it's a really cool idea. And I still believe it is a really cool idea to have those 11 watches with the associated with the planets, and it's based on a Speedmaster. It's an exact copy. The then designer, now CEO of Gregory Kissling, he was I think heavily involved in the design of the MoonSwatch, and he was also in charge of designing the Speedy Tuesday watches. And I think those 11 first ones were awesome. I think, and it proved to be awesome because I also asked Mr. Hayek, I said, do you expect to see queues for these watches? And he said, yeah, I expect quite some demand for them. But nobody expected the queue with 5,000 persons in there. Almost fighting with each other to get these watches. And at first they said, yeah, you can buy 2 a person maximum, but the queue was 5,000 persons. So they quickly changed it to 1 watch per person. So on the fly, these decisions changed. And a lot of people got angry also online, of course, on social media, because something else was communicated than what was being executed, but they just adjusted to what was happening live. And a lot of people didn't get that, or they thought, there was misinformation whatsoever. No, they just adjusted their strategy a little bit on the fly. So those first 11 models, I think they were really cool. It was also cool that you had to fight for them, or to be waiting for them, or trying different boutiques. I think in the US, the situation was a little bit different because there are not that many Swatch boutiques in the US. So a lot of people were a bit left in the dark because they had to travel very far. Mm-hmm. In Europe, it's easier. There's 1 or 2 Swatch boutiques in every country, and the countries here are relatively small. It takes me 1.5 hours to drive from the west to the east, for example. And Belgium is even smaller, or Luxembourg. So here it was not that hard to get them, basically. But so those first 11 models, I think were really cool. I think what they did 1 year later to have the watch with the moonshine chronograph hand, in all honesty, I think they should not have done this, because I think it was too sought after. I think it was not sought after. I think too far fetched to just change the second hand with a different print in moonshine gold. And I think I have one, but I think, if you did only one, okay, but they did one every month. Then novelty wears out quickly. So I think if they would have skipped those, I think there were 11 models of those. If they would have skipped those and then introduced 2 years later the Snoopy in black and the Snoopy in white again, I think it would have been more successful. Because I think people got a bit tired seeing those moonshine gold hand versions for 1 year long. So the novelty wore off. The first were cool. I think they also could have discontinued them at some point, come back with the Snoopies. I think the Earthrise that they did recently is really cool. I think the mistake was that second batch of those 11 moonshine gold hand watches.
For me personally, my interest waned exactly at that point in time, but it has now come back with the Snoopies, and the Earth phase is, if I ever walk into a Swatch store and they have that one, that's the one I'd be going after right now. But Brent mentioned the number of over 400,000 uses of the Speedy Tuesday hashtag. Did you notice a big spike after the MoonSwatch release in numbers? If you're following those numbers, it definitely seems like it attracted a lot of new people to the community.
Yeah, so what I noticed is that Omega, when the MoonSwatch was released, Omega told me that they saw a huge spike in sales of the MoonWatch. And they can say that to me, and I have the tendency to believe what they tell me. But I also know not everyone believes what brands tell them. So I get that. But then I checked with Chrono24, and they showed me a graph on the sales of Moonwatches on Chrono24. And they showed me the graph of sales and the transactions during and after the release of the MoonSwatch. And it's insane. The effect was insane. So it really boosted the sales of the Moonwatch on Chrono24. So I can also imagine it boosted the sales in Omega boutiques and at authorized dealers. What I didn't see is the spike in usage of Speedy Tuesday, because I didn't measure. So that's first of all, but I assume there is no spike because it's a different audience. I feel that the people who bought those MoonSwatch, it's broader than only watch people.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that a lot of people who were like into sneakers, the high snobiety kind of people, that they also jumped on the MoonSwatch, who had nothing with watches before. And perhaps they knew the MoonWatch because Omega is such a household name. They knew it and then they bought it and then they got interested. But I think that it's a bridge too far to then also jump on a Speedy Tuesday bandwagon. So I don't see the effect there, to be honest. I do see the effect that a lot of people just got more interested in the Speedmaster as such. So a lot of people also here in my office here in The Hague at Fratello, I have colleagues that said, oh, this will be really bad for the Speedmaster, the MoonSwatch. It will have a negative effect on the image and whatnot. But it has proven to be differently. It has proven that more Moonwatches got sold due to the MoonSwatch. I don't know if that's also the case for the Blancpain, the Swatch Blancpain collaboration, but for the MoonSwatch, it was definitely applicable. I just feel personally, that the last ones are cool. The first 11 are cool, but the ones with the moonshine hand, those are not for me. And I think those diluted the project a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, agreed. When the MoonSwatch came around in Montreal, we're in Canada, so our boutiques there are many boutiques, but only a handful, maybe 2 or 3 in all of Canada carried the MoonSwatch. Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And so, between Montreal and Toronto, there's a 6-hour drive. Between Toronto and Vancouver, there's a 50-something hour drive if you're not sleeping. So the lineups were crazy. And just like you said, it wasn't just because Montreal doesn't have a watch community like Toronto does or New York does. We have somewhat a small community. But the lineups at downtown Montreal were several blocks long. It was cold. It was April, was it March or April?
March, I think.
March, yeah, March in Canada. It is cold. So I didn't line up. They sold out immediately. Every shop I went to afterwards, no one had any. It was only until maybe last year that I actually saw one in the store.
Wow. The fun thing for me was that they introduced it 1 week before Watches and Wonders in that year.
Yes.
In 2022. And so we had them. We were able to buy quite a few of them for the team as well. So when we were at Watches and Wonders, we were wearing the MoonSwatches.
Oh, yeah.
And we were the only ones. So when we went to Patek Philippe and Rolex, for example, they said, yeah, we have new watches, but show me the MoonSwatch first.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
Everywhere we went, you heard the Velcro.
By the end of the show, Velcro's hanging on by one string.
The MoonSwatch, and it was very funny. If you're at Patek Philippe or Rolex, you think, oh, those are very corporate guys and a little bit stiff, and Rolex watches or Patek watches. Oh, show us the MoonSwatch. You got very fanatical about it. I think that was a cool thing, and I think it's also a proof that Hayek and Swatch can still be disruptive and do cool shit, basically.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, that was really cool. My birthday's in April, and when the MoonSwatch was announced, that was my plan. I was going to get that guy, and then my buddy and I were planning on going out, maybe spending the night downtown. We were thinking all these things. It was really cold, and we saw pictures of lineups, and I said, nah, maybe not. And there was another watch that came out slightly earlier from Seiko, a GMT Seiko 5 that had just come out, which is also quite interesting and maybe a little bit more expensive. And that's the one I opted for my birthday that year and enjoyed that a lot. It was a great summer watch. It was a lot of fun. Yep. And like you said, quite disruptive for a GMT to be at that price point at that time. But MoonSwatch overshadowed Watches and Wonders and almost everything else. That
was very interesting. And it showed that they were very powerful at the time. And I also think it brought Swatch back high up in the top 10 Swatch Group brands and their revenue.
Absolutely.
So they put them back there as well. And what I now see mainly, if I'm going outside doing somewhere, I play golf. So if I'm in a golf course whatsoever, I see a lot of people, young, old, man, woman, wearing a MoonSwatch. Yep. I think that's quite interesting to see so many MoonSwatches in the flesh outside, like you saw the swatches back in the 90s and 80s on people's wrists. Now you see the MoonSwatch everywhere, and I think that's a cool thing. And even my daughter, she's 11, and she had a good school report, and I asked her, "What do you want?" And I really want the pink MoonSwatch, the one like that mom that.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
When you see someone at the golf course with a MoonSwatch, do you walk up to them and slip out the 321 and explain the whole history?
One thing, if someone is wearing a MoonWatch, then I often ask them or compliment them on the watch, because then I know, okay, there's a certain reason they bought. They know what they are wearing. They bought it for a reason, or there's a story. There's always a story to it.
Mhm.
When it's someone wearing a Rolex, I never ask, because that could be just the fact that it's a Rolex and they bought a Rolex because it's a good watch and there's no story behind it.
Yeah.
I have to think a little bit with the MoonSwatch. If someone wears a MoonSwatch and I would comment on it, they would think, hey, that's a weirdo. Go away.
Yeah. I heard a story once. Someone was on a subway. I think I heard it on more than one podcast. Someone was on the subway and there was a gentleman in the subway wearing a Sea Dweller. And so the person said, hey, nice Sea Dweller. And the reply was, no, man, it's a Rolex. So that's basically what you get for Rolex. But anyways, not that they're bad. They're fantastic watches. I've had many and they're great watches. And people do sometimes have stories for them. But the general public, like you said, they're buying it because it's a nice watch and, whatever. So going back to Fratello, can you tell us how that all got started and to this day, how it's going? And did you ever think it would be this popular and influential when you started it?
No, not at all. So basically, I registered the domain name. I think you can still look it up somewhere, in 2002 or 2003. So I started Fratello as it is now in 2004. But I had the domain earlier because I used it. I was still a student. I purchased watches, had them restored, and then sold them again. So I was more or less a bit of a vintage watch dealer is a big name, but I just was buying and selling watches. And I used the domain name for that. So that's why it's called Fratello Watches and not just Fratello. Although now we also have Fratello.com, so it also works. But at the time I used Fratello Watches because it was clearly in buying and selling watches. But I stopped that because at some point I thought, I need to buy an apartment and not live in the student's house anymore. And so I need a real job. So I got a real job, forgot about it. And at some point, blogs were coming up about all sorts of topics. And I had a look at it and I saw they all use WordPress. So I installed WordPress, I think version 1.0. And that was the start of the Fratello as it is today. And we still run on WordPress and not on 1.0. But I started, it really started as a blog, just giving links to interesting articles on Time Zone or Watchuseek or other watch websites, like a blog was meant to be at the time. And I think that changed over time into more watch reviews, more storytelling, like a diary kind of thing on watches. And then it changed into what it is today, like an online watch magazine, basically, with just watch media as is. So I started by myself. Then I think around 2010, we had some others joining, all still as a hobby project. And then I think 2014, it became more serious and we started to do it full time. Or at least I started to do it full time, still with the help of some freelancers and volunteers. And then in 2018, it became really a business. So a company was founded, Fratello Watches, and we bought. One of the investors bought the website back from the then owner because at some point it was owned by a German publisher, and bought it back. All the content, and we went from 2018 to today. We grew tremendously, so we invested heavily. We have 8 people full time on the payroll, and I think we have a little bit more on freelance contributors, video guy, photographer, and so on and so on. So it really grew big. One of our main shareholders is Chrono24, or the holding above Chrono24. Called MPN, Marketplace Networks. But let's say it's just Chrono24. So we are part of the Chrono24 family, basically, giving us a lot of means to hire people to do cool things without them interfering basically in what we do. So they don't interfere in our content whatsoever. So they really leave us alone in what we do, which is also appreciated by the brands, I guess. And that really works out well for us. So get some good traffic. I think we grew tremendously in traffic reach over the last few years. We also start doing e-commerce a little bit on the side. So we have accessories like straps and things. Sometimes collaboration watches that went really well at first, and now we see like the market is a bit slow on watches, and we see that as well. So we might take it a bit more easy there, but I think the outlook is positive that will get back. I think also what we hear from brands and retailers that I think December and January will already quite positive again. So let's see where that ends. And how positive or negative Watches and Wonders is basically. You can also always see how much retailers are willing to purchase from new collections. So that has influence. The funny thing is that the slow market for watches is not affecting Fratello as such. So there's still demand for watch content. Basically, there's decline in visitors and number of reads and so on. So that's a reassuring thing. So we're still growing in terms of traffic. Well, even the market is a little bit slow now. So I'm very happy to see that. Because if there would be also decline in interest in general in watches, I think then we would have a bigger problem.
We've had people like Ariel Adams, Zach Weiss, as well as a host of really influential YouTubers on the show. And now we have you. And you guys have all made your careers and your businesses based on watch journalism.
Let me correct you short. Let me correct you there. Because watch journalists do not exist. There are no watch journalists. We are paid by the brands. That's our revenue stream. We have two revenue streams. One is e-commerce. The other one is partnerships. We have partnerships with brands. So brands pay us to give them exposure. Brands do not give us content whatsoever. They ship us the watch. We write an article and we give them a certain position on the website, be it brand of the month, watch of the week, and so on. So we give them and promise them a certain amount of exposure, certain amounts of views, yada, 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 social media exposure. So basically they pay us. How can we call ourselves journalists if we write about these brands that pay us? We can still have this neutral tone of voice or opinionated tone of voice, but in the end, there's a very thin line we need to walk in what we say and what we can't say because the brands pay us. So there are no watch journalists.
Yes, that actually usurps my question a little bit, because what I wanted to get to was, what do you think is the importance of that particular practice? What is its space in the industry, and why should people look at that?
Yeah. So what we not try to be is watch journalists. We use some of the journalist practices. So if we write something about a brand or if we do some research about watches, we use rebuttal. So we ask the brands whether something is correct or incorrect or whatsoever. So we do try to apply some journalistic principles, basically. So that's one thing. The other thing is we are watch writers. We write about watches. We are here to educate and to entertain people. So if you only do watch education, you get a very dry website about facts and figures, and this watch is 46 millimeters look to look, yada, yada, yada. And that's also what a lot of people want to know. But I think it's more fun if you can do a bit more storytelling about the watch, how you felt when wearing the watch, what you were doing, and so on and so on. So to dress it up. So we rather entertain and educate on watches than we call ourselves watch journalists, basically. The position is what we not try to be is extensions of the marketing department for watch brands. So we don't want to rehash press releases. And I still see a lot of watch media are rehashing press releases, which I feel is a bit, they use the stock images, they just rewrite the press release. And I think you need to make it your own. You need to own the watch. You need to have the watch in your hands, or at least come up with a cool story about the watch or about the brand, and to make it something worthwhile reading, right? So we don't want to be the extension of the marketing department, but we do want to help the brands making watches desired, basically. We want people to buy watches in order to also to keep us alive. You know, it's that's how it works. That doesn't mean that everything is nice and lovely that's being introduced. We still get our calls and emails from brands very angry. Why did you write this? Why did you write that? Why did you do this? Well, we might not advertise with you anymore because you wrote this and this. And that's all fine. I'm happy to have those discussions with them, because I also feel we need a bit of that independence, because if you just write that everything is lovely, then you are, I think, 180 degrees away from being a watch journalist. And that's also not where we want to be. So like I said, it's somewhere in between where we want to educate and entertain, but we also don't want to be the watch brand and selling the watches. But yeah, the watches need to be sold in order for us to survive as well, of course. Mm-hmm. So it's a thin line, but in the end, I think it's entertainment. That's all. what all the YouTubers do. That's what all the watch memes are about. That's what social media is about. It's purely about entertainment. And if you love watches, you are clever enough. And I think in general, watch buyers are quite clever. If they read an article, whether it's on Fratello or Hodinkee or a blog to watch or wherever, they can also come up with their own conclusion. I like this watch, or I don't like this watch, or I agree with him, or I don't agree with him or her, yada, yada, yada. You are clever enough to draw your own conclusion, basically, after you read a review.
Mm-hmm. So it's quite an accomplishment. It's always awesome to see somebody like bring their hobby and turn that into a career like you have. Something I would aspire to do myself at some point in time, hopefully. But did the writing come first for you, like before the watch? Like, were you a trained writer, or is that a skill you developed afterwards?
No. I have a background in, like I said, in information management and IT. Yeah. So I could hardly write a faultless sentence, to be honest. I'm not even kidding. So the writing only came later. Mm-hmm. And I wrote reports. I worked for a consultancy company and an accounting company, so I can write reports. But I had a huge interest in magazines as long as I know. So I love magazines, all sorts of topics. I think that's one part. But the watch collecting came first, basically.
Interesting.
And the watch collecting combined with IT brought me to buying and selling watches online as a little side hustle. And then in the end, I thought, okay, I want to write about watches. I was so fanatic like Mark on Time Zone and Watchuseek and so on, that really felt, it's nice to write for an audience and to share my opinion, to hear what others have to say, and to get some feedback and so on. The interaction is super cool. And that's also what I really like on Fratello, that we have a very nice and lively community in the comments. I was looking for the word. So we have a good engagement, basically, which I really like and appreciate. I think that makes it cool.
Very positive engagement is very good.
Yeah, so
I read an article from late last year. You were discussing some of the watches you have on your want list. You had a Lang, Breguet, Grand Seiko, a couple other ones in there. Have you managed to track any of those down since, or is there a particular watch you're really after right now?
I have to admit that 2024 was an awful year for me in buying watches. I didn't buy that many, to be honest. I wanted to buy a Breguet 5157, so the Classique with the two hands, because the year before I bought a Tradition, and I'm really in love with that watch. So I also want to have the Classique. So basically, all those watches are still on my list. I could not just make a proper decision somehow. More than ever, I'm trying to decide a little bit more properly on what watch I want to buy. In the past, I had a lot of impulse buys, and then you end up with a lot of watches that you only wear so and so often.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I really want to give it more thought, and I really want to have a watch that I'm really after. The Breguet is still high on my list. I bought a Grand Seiko the other week, so that's an old one. So I think that's nice. And but even with all the Speedmasters coming out last year, I didn't buy a single one because we don't know. I don't know which one, and I don't need all of them that they brought to the market. But I'm not sure yet. I noticed that my taste also changed a little bit more towards dress watches and gold watches in recent years. So I think the Breguet is still really high on my list. But I also want to see what Breguet will be doing now with the new CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
cool.
Very cool. So when we put out the call online on Instagram that you were going to be on, we asked people for some questions that they might have for you. We have a question from James Fournier, who goes by Flying Spring Bars on Instagram.
Yeah.
He messaged me the moment he found out that you were going to be on the show. And he said, please ask RJ if he will be my friend. He's a huge fan of your work and listens to your podcast very religiously. He also happens to be a member of our West Montreal group. So if you get a chance, say hi to James online if you could. That'd make his day.
I will do.
Now, for some serious questions, another gentleman by the name of Nabil goes by space_dweller on Instagram. Mm-hmm. He said, what convinced Omega to take a risk on community-driven design project like Speedy Tuesday series, especially given the heritage-focused reputation? Now, you touched a bit on this already. What do you think was the impetus on them to reach out to you to get this done?
Trust. This was a project solely done on trust. There is not one agreement or contract or NDA signed for those watches. None.
Wow.
It was only done based on trust. It was trust in the Fratello people we had back then. And within Omega, there was only a handful of people who knew about this.
Wow.
And they knew and understood that Speedy Tuesday was a passion project, that Omega is really close to my heart because of the family affairs. And I really love those watches. And I think that became very clear to Reynald Aschliman, and that gave him also the confidence to move forward with this, because for him, it was a high stake to do this, because it was his first big project as a CEO, and everyone was looking at him, because it was also the first online deal, as I previously mentioned. So it is only based on trust.
That's really cool. I didn't expect that answer. That's fantastic. Then he said the Speedy Tuesday collaborations blurred the line between enthusiasts and brand. How does Fratello maintain editorial independence while co-creating with Omega?
Yeah, that also has to do with what I previously said, how I position Fratello and ourselves, and that I say, hey, there are no watch journalists. You will not see on our website that we call ourselves watch journalists. But to answer more clearly, I write about watches. That's my business. That's my work. On the other hand, I'm also still a watch collector. I'm a watch collector first, and then my work life comes. So I collect Speedmasters. I don't call myself a watch collector. I think, like you said at the beginning, I just hoard watches, and I try to buy the watches that I also want to wear. But I do collect Speedmasters. So I'm a Speedmaster collector first. And I think if you can see that separately from the Fratello business, and as said, we did not sign one NDA, one contract, one agreement whatsoever. I can keep that separately very well. That's no issue. So I can also say that some Speedmasters I really don't like, and I write that down. And Omega reads this, they see it, and they say, okay, that's your opinion, that's fine. We will not bother you with it. Some other brands, they get really angry with me and get pissed with me. Why do you write this? When I wrote that I really don't like Speedmaster Alinghi or the Porsche Club thing, they said, yeah, that's your opinion. That's fine. That's your role. That's your role as watch media. So it's fine. So I also think Omega also shows they are bigger than that.
That's very cool. And his last question is, will there be another Speedy Tuesday collaboration? Is there something in the works?
Well, I hope no. So we did one in 2017 and 2018. The Ultraman was also a Speedy Tuesday collaboration, and then we also thought about another one. And there are some designs. I think there's even a prototype made, or or mock-up. I can't remember even. But it died down a little bit because Omega stopped making limited editions. So a lot of people complained basically to Swatch Group, to Mr. Hayek. There are too many limited editions. Omega, it dilutes the brand and whatnot. So if you look at the catalog, you will see that the last limited edition Speedmasters were done in 2019. So in 2020, the Snoopy came, but that's not a limited edition. It's not produced that much. So they only produce an X number per year, just like the 321 that I'm wearing. They produce an X number per year, but it's not a limited edition. Now, a Speedy Tuesday 3 does not need to be a limited edition as such, but that was the concept. So, that was moved off the table basically. But yeah, if possible, I would love to do another Speedy Tuesday, but we also need to do one that brings something new to the table, and not just do a Speedy Tuesday 3 to have a Speedy Tuesday 3. I think we really want to do something cool. And I think with the last releases from Omega, with the new MoonSwatch, the regular model, the Speedmaster Professional came in 21, the 321 came in 2020, like the Snoopy. Last year, they had the Weidel Moonwatch. They had the new first Omega in space. They had the pilots one, the flight qualified. Then I think, what's there to add? You can still add. You can go back to vintage or whatsoever, but they already did those kind of things. They already did a lot of different versions and iterations that it becomes more and more difficult to come up with something that adds something new to the table. I don't want to bring a Speedmaster Speedy Tuesday 3 with just an orange hand, or I don't know, some faux patina, or don't know what. It really something else. Yeah. We have some ideas though, so that's definitely do something. But
I'll keep on the lookout for that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, nothing in the plans yet, but it's a discussion that is like ongoing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, RJ, I'm glancing at my watch here right now, and I realize we're closing in on our hour. We could obviously keep on asking you plenty of questions, but that's all we have for this morning. And what we have is already so much more than enough. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule for us today. I'm sure that I speak on behalf of our and as well as Bob when I say it was truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Time to Calibrate is available anywhere you can find fine podcasts. Please do like, follow, and share. Hit all the bells and whistles. It does make a difference. Until next time, thanks for listening.